Flames rose into the sky like a beast awakened, roaring and cracking with the kind of hunger that made the earth itself tremble. The sunset behind it turned the smoke into a violent swirl of orange and black. Cars rushed past on the highway, drivers too frightened or confused to stop, and the air smelled of burning metal and fear. In the middle of that chaos stood a worn-out mechanic named Ethan Hall, his hands trembling as he stared at the overturned SUV that had just exploded once, only once, before going quiet again. But the silence was worse, because inside that shattered vehicle were small, desperate cries that didn't belong in any moment of this world. They belonged to innocence. They belonged to life. And they were fading. Sparkles, if you believe kindness and second chances still matter in this world, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring more emotional stories like this. Sparkles. Ethan's boots slipped on gravel as he ran toward the heat, his heart pounding in his ears louder than the sirens that hadn't even arrived yet. The smoke burned into his throat, and his shirt caught embers that stung through the worn fabric, but he didn't stop. The screams inside that car, two tiny voices, cut through everything else. As he got closer, he saw a young blonde woman slumped against a shattered window, her face streaked with dust and tears, her breath shallow. Behind her, in the back seat, two girls, maybe 3 years old, pressed their palms to the window, their matching blue eyes wide with terror, their little teddy bear pinned between them like a lifeline. The world around him blurred. Ethan's life had never been heroic. He was just a man who fixed engines in a dusty garage on the outskirts of town. He was a man who'd lost his parents young, who'd lost his marriage a few years later, and who had grown used to a quiet loneliness he rarely admitted to himself. But none of that mattered right now. Those little girls didn't know him. They didn't know his struggles, his disappointments, or his broken heart. All they knew was that the fire behind them was crawling forward, inching toward the fuel tank, and if someone didn't do something now, everything would end in a single violent second. He yanked at the driver's side door, but it wouldn't budge. Heat seared his arm, but he kept pulling. Adrenaline surged through him as he ran around to the back. The girls were crying, banging their tiny fists against the window, calling for a mother who couldn't even stay conscious long enough to answer. Ethan picked up a rock and smashed the window. Glass rained down. The fire was growing louder, closer, angrier. He reached in, his arms scraping on jagged metal, and pulled one girl out first, her little pink dress warm from the heat. Then he reached back in and grabbed the second girl, holding her tight against his chest as she sobbed into his shirt, her small hands clinging to him like he was the only solid thing left in the world. The woman in the front seat groaned, her arm hanging awkwardly, her face pale. Ethan didn't hesitate. He set the twins safely on the ground a few feet away and then reached in to drag the woman out. The fire behind her suddenly flared, heat hitting him with a force that made his vision blur, but he wrapped an arm around her and pulled her out just as another explosion sent a wave of fire rolling over the wreckage. He shielded her with his body until the blast faded, and only then did he let himself breathe. People finally began stopping their cars. Someone called 911. Someone else grabbed a blanket. But Ethan didn't hear most of it. He was kneeling beside the twins, brushing debris from their hair. One of them touched his cheek with trembling fingers, as if trying to understand why this soot-covered stranger had appeared out of nowhere to save them. The other tucked the teddy bear under her chin and swallowed a sob, her wide eyes searching his face like it held all the answers she'd ever need. When the paramedics arrived, everything became a blur of motion and noise. The woman, who Ethan later learned was named Grace Williams, was rushed into the ambulance with oxygen and a neck brace. The twins were wrapped in soft blankets and checked over by medics with gentle hands, but they never stopped reaching for Ethan, their cries echoing through the night as the ambulance doors closed. He didn't follow them. He didn't know if he should. He just returned to his old pickup truck, sat on the tailgate, and let the adrenaline drain from his body until he felt both weightless and crushed at the same time. As he drove back to his small farm outside Cedar Ridge, the image of those girls' faces stayed in his mind, glowing softly like two fragile lights in a world full of shadows. That night, Ethan didn't sleep. He replayed the fire, the screams, and the moment he carried the twins out of the burning vehicle. He wondered if they were okay. He wondered if the mother survived. He wondered why fate had placed him on that road at that exact moment when he had been on the way to pick up cheap spare parts from a junkyard that closed early anyway. The universe didn't usually give Ethan meaning. But tonight, he felt the faint, tremor-like sense that something had shifted, something bigger than him, bigger than anything he could understand. The next morning, he stepped out onto his porch with a mug of coffee and stopped mid-sip. The quiet farmland air was shaking, not from machinery, not from thunder, but from something else entirely. Within seconds, the sky filled with the sound of engines, and Ethan shaded his eyes just in time to see 3 helicopters descending toward his property. Dust spiraled upward as their rotors sliced through the air. Birds scattered. Cows in the pasture lifted their heads in confusion. Ethan's heart began to race. This wasn't normal. This wasn't anything close to normal. The helicopters landed in perfect synchronization near his barn, and men in suits stepped out first, followed by medical staff, and finally, a tall man with the confident posture of someone used to commanding entire worlds. But most striking of all was the sight of the twins from last night, dressed now in fresh clothes, their hair tied neatly in matching bows, holding hands as they walked toward him. Grace, their mother, was beside them, her arm in a sling but alive, her face still pale but illuminated with emotion as she saw Ethan standing alone on the porch. Ethan set his mug down slowly, feeling as though his farm had become the center of some surreal dream. The suits approached first, asking if he was Ethan Hall, confirming his identity, ensuring everything was in order. Ethan felt small among these people who clearly lived in a world far different from his own. But then Grace stepped forward with her daughters, and the world softened. Grace explained that she had been searching for him since dawn. That the doctors said she might not have survived without his intervention. That her daughters wouldn't be alive if he hadn't acted when he did. Her voice wavered, and the twins clung to her, then ran toward Ethan without hesitation, their small arms wrapping around his legs with the unquestioning trust only children gave to the people who saved them. Behind them, the tall man stepped forward. Grace introduced him as Marcus Williams, her brother, and one of the wealthiest ranch owners and philanthropists in the region. Marcus wasn't a man used to being speechless, but today, he looked at Ethan with something close to awe. He said they had come not just to thank him, but because they believed acts of extraordinary bravery deserved extraordinary recognition. Ethan wasn't sure how to react. His farm was old. His equipment was failing. His debts were climbing. But he had never saved those girls for reward or attention. He had acted because he couldn't imagine doing anything else. Marcus told him that people like Ethan were rare. That courage like his deserved to be honored. Within minutes, cameras emerged from one helicopter, news crews who had been invited to capture the moment. Ethan felt overwhelmed, his throat tightening. He wasn't a hero. He wasn't ready for cameras. He was just a man who worked with his hands and lived alone in a quiet farmhouse. But then Grace stepped closer. She took his hand with her uninjured one, and her voice was soft enough that only he could hear it. She said that her girls hadn't slept until she promised them they would see him again. That he had become a part of their story forever. That sometimes, the people we least expect become the angels life sends when everything is falling apart. The news coverage that followed changed everything. Donations flooded Ethan's small garage from strangers he had never met. His farm, previously on the brink of foreclosure, was suddenly stable, saved by community support and Marcus's generous contribution. Grace stayed in touch, visiting often with the twins, who now called Ethan their hero, with the innocent certainty of children who knew love as something simple and real. But the truth was, Ethan needed them just as much. Their presence filled a silence in his life he had long grown used to. Their laughter echoed through his barn. Their drawings covered his refrigerator. Grace's smile